Redemption originally was planned for the Season 3 finale, which would have been 9 episodes after Worf's discommendation by the Klingons. Instead, they decided on the best of both worlds and postponed the story a full year. But they did take advantage of that year, offering touchstone reminders in family and the main plot of reunion, as well as a seemingly unrelated story in the mind's eye. There's a reason that my Generations review required a 1-minute William Tell Overture recap of events, because the Klingon Civil War, warned of back in Sins of the Father, has been woven throughout the first half of TNG. I'm not reviewing all of those episodes on the important grounds that they're not in the queue. I really don't want to have people who have been waiting patiently for their reviews to come up to have to wait any longer to cover these episodes, especially because overall Star Trek was trying to avoid demanding that you watch all of these episodes. They wanted to see here, especially, if they could take this complicated web and still have it be accessible to people. So we'll see how well they handled that. The Captain's Log info dump is naturally a quick and effective way to do that. In this case, telling us that Picard is handling the installation ceremony of the next big cheese of the Klingon High Council, which is to be Gowron. Then we quickly jump into Picard visiting Worf in the midst of Botleth practice. Now that is a subtle nod to the events of Reunion, but it's not essential to these events. It's just a wink to the audience about how Worf used this skill and that weapon to kill Duras, the man who had framed Worf's father for the traitorous crimes of his own father. Worf accepted that dishonor rather than allow a civil war to take place, but Picard sees this as the moment when Worf should confront the Council and have his honor restored. Worf seems surprisingly hesitant, given that it is clearly on his mind every day. It might be disillusionment with the Klingon culture and how it differs from his expectations, to be looked down upon by those who are willing to do dishonorable things for their own petty ends, to be struck and spat upon by lesser men. Perhaps what he fears is to be humiliated and all for nothing. But with Picard's prodding, he seems ready to get it back, and just in time, because Gowron has shown up to escort the Enterprise to the Klingon homeworld, warning that if they don't take action quickly, there will be a Klingon civil war. Since this is the Klingon Civil War episode, well, obviously they weren't quick enough. After the titles, Gowron gets us up to speed on the politics of it. The sisters of Duras, Lursa and B'Etor, now speak for the House of Duras and have rallied his supporters.
And they would claim the leadership of the council.
Women may not...
I mean, that's just crazy talk. Didn't you see the No Girls Allowed sign on the door to the council chamber? It's an odd bit, considering that the last time we saw Gowron, he was offering a woman, who was only half Klingon no less, a seat on the council. Whatever they're plotting, Picard can do nothing about it outside of the confines of Klingon law. This is already a delicate mess that he's in, being at the center of Klingon politics. The only thing that could make Picard more uncomfortable is if he had to do it in front of children while wearing a panda bear costume. Speaking of extreme discomfort, Gowron is escorted to the transporter room by Worf, and for someone who had growled about the diminishing honor in the Empire, having to be escorted by someone publicly stripped of that is like Rick Santorum finding himself trapped in an elevator with Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show. He's hostile to Worf, but when Worf explains that Duras' father was the one responsible, he's amazed and shocked that the Council went along with it. You have proof? Yes. That Duras' father was the traitor? Yes! To strike a blow against my greatest political enemies? Yes! Will you help me? No! Gowron would love to slap the Duras across the face with this information, but it's just not worth it. They have too many powerful friends to risk it, so Worf is just going to have to suck it up. Well, this has been a pretty humiliating experience.
Down in 10 forward, so I thought I'd get off a little target practice. Do you mind if I join you?
You? Practice?
I like to keep my eyes sharp.
I practice at level 14.
Guess I could come down to that.
But the day's not over yet. Plenty more humiliation on tap, and Guinan's the bartender after all. But even as she literally beats him at his own game, her remarks reveal to Worf that he is not like other Klingons. He has his own ways. It's an essential step for Worf in this. When one looks at the history of human honor, scholars have suggested that it has taken two different forms over time. Originally, there was external honor, which itself was represented in two ways. Horizontal honor, the honor that one experiences from amongst one's peers, and vertical honor, that which was to you specifically due to your accomplishments. A code of honor in this case is dictated by the group. You must adhere to these standards. If not, You are without honor and unworthy of inclusion amongst the group. It echoes to us still today. Standards were things like courage for men and chastity for women, hence why a man who's seen as craven might be told to give up his man card, or a woman who sleeps around would be labeled a slut, a sign of rejection for failing to measure up to this code. I'm not defending that, I'm just noting it. And those who are exceptional are given special respect. A man who lands a particularly daring kill on a mammoth, or wins a fight even when outnumbered, would have his adherence to the code above and beyond what was expected, rewarded with respect from his peers and adoration by outsiders. Both these types of external honor were important, because to lose one's honor was a rejection, and in much of history that could be literal, such as being ejected from a tribe, a death sentence for the most part. Or in the more civilized world, the loss of honor was to be ostracized by honorable members of society and be reduced to a life of poverty and misery. So when one's honor was challenged, you were expected by the code and compelled by self-respect and a desire to thrive to answer that challenge. Hence why two politicians getting into a spat may suddenly find themselves in the middle of a field with pistols ready to shoot each other to ensure that their honor remains intact. It may seem silly, but to not act and lose face puts your honor at risk. Hence the comment that honor must be satisfied. From this, it's clear to see that honor to the Klingons was of the external kind. Worf's discommendation ceremony doesn't get any more direct as far as horizontal honor goes. For the rejection of the code, in this case treason, he himself is rejected. And when Gowron and Duras vied for the top dog position on the High Council, ancient tradition required that they list their many deeds to prove their worth. Vertical honor, the recognition for their outstanding character in honor. And whenever a Klingon's honor is challenged, they are quick to respond and ensure that it is protected. Finally, as I said, traditionally, things like courage were what men were expected to have, and women were expected to be chaste. So there was a separation along gender lines there, a boys-only club, much like the way Gowron describes the High Council, with no place for women, it seems. Now, I said honor was of two forms, so the one that was not external would be, obviously, internal. An extremely long development involving everything from Christian ideals of universal brotherhood, Greek concepts of universal democracy, the Romantic movement and a reconsideration of the role of the individual, and the rise of the middle class to challenge traditional noble ideas. This more recent form of honor is not entirely internal. What honor really means today is having a code of right and wrong behavior and adhering to it, being true to one's conscience, while at the same time having respectability for following such a code. This is why hypocrisy is a common attack today for someone you dislike. It suggests that the person is not actually adhering to the rigorous standards that they espouse, and thus are unworthy of respect. They have no honor. Worf, as Guinan points out, grew up amongst humans, so his entire concept of Klingon honor was not imposed from without, but came from within. Thus he possesses internal honor, and as he will one day say, his honor cannot be taken away by others. No one ever gave it to him, he forged it, and he himself knows that he adheres to it. This difference is why Worf conflicts with the Klingons over matters of honor. Remember that the reason the Council went along with branding Mogh a traitor was that Worf lived outside the Empire. Thus he was already not possessing the horizontal honor that existed amongst Klingon warriors, so what would it possibly matter? It was Worf's internal honor that compelled him to act, that said they may not consider him part of their group, but he possessed honor and he would not let a challenge to it go unanswered. And it also was what allowed him to accept discommendation, because while his people rejected him, his true group, his crewmates, knew that he had acted honorably and continued to respect him. Guinan's remarks were to remind him that he was not like other Klingons in this way, and he needed to act accordingly, within his own personal code of honor, but recognizing that those others adhered to a different kind of code, and with that knowledge to deal with them appropriately. Worf gets a leave of absence from Picard to deal with this, and his first step is to find his secret brother, Kurn, who is now commander of a squadron of birds of prey. Worf gives the bad news to his brother, so they hash out a plan. Gowron is weak. The Duras sisters will take control away from him, and we can't allow them to gain control of the High Council. We're going to have to act to ensure that they can't replace Gowron. I think we're both of the same mind on this, brother. Agreed, brother. There's only one thing we can do. We must help Gowron. We must kill Gowron! Maybe we better start this conversation over. Kurn has 4 squadron commanders who are ready to join him in killing Gowron, overthrowing the council, and replacing it with a new one. But Worf rejects that as dishonorable behavior. But, knowing how the game is now played, that amongst the Klingon honor code there would be no compelling reason to follow a weak leader, Worf can instead instruct Kurn and his followers to do nothing until Gowron is in trouble, and then offer to follow, on the condition that their family name is restored. Meanwhile, Picard is finishing the ceremony to put Gowron in charge, complete with the whole let him speak now or forever hold his peace thing.
There is one.
I would have been here sooner, but the chain fell off my bicycle. Alright, so when we left off, Doogie Klingon had just claimed that he had the right to become leader of the High Council as the son of Duras. His aunts soon arrive, announcing that he's running on the support of exposed Klingon boobs. Problem is that Duras wasn't married. He can't be tied down. He's a bird, man. He's got to be free. But it seems this isn't Game of Thrones, and a bastard can indeed apply to be in charge of the entire Klingon Empire. Keep in mind that Klingons have a shorter childhood, so this kid would, if he were human, not be old enough to drive a car, asking if he can run the highest office in the Empire. It's transparent to everyone he'd be nothing but a mouthpiece for the Duras sisters. Of course, it is just a way to get around a stupid rule that they can't directly sit on the council, so you can't exactly fault them on that point, although you can fault them on their apparent need to easily carry around rolls of quarters. After the ceremony, we see the Duras family meeting with some Romulans to discuss plans, including one in the shadows that we had previously seen in the shadows in the Mind's Eye. She oversaw Geordi's mind screw there. Meanwhile, Worf's ready to make his move and seems to catch Picard off guard. Frere Jacques, for what the hell? He takes Worf aside.
You're using our files on the Kittimer massacre as evidence against Duras' father.
Yes, sir.
Do you not see an inherent conflict of...
No, not really. I've had close to a quarter century to mull this over, and I think Picard's point is that Worf just came in and asked for the stuff that he knew was here, while Klingons would have had to somehow learn about it, send in a formal request, and then have it answered. That's about the best I can do. I think Picard is upset because there should have been more paperwork involved. Because otherwise, what is Picard going to say if anyone asks? No, if I give you facts, you might take action based on things that have actually happened. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the preservation of the principles of non-interference in the internal events and politics of other civilizations. Shouldn't it be to the truth? The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. Yeah, that kind of rolls off the tongue. All right, you can have the files, but I get to use this from now on. Surprisingly, the Duras sisters personally summoned Picard down to have a friendly face-to-face conversation. Tea, Captain? Oh, don't mind if I do. We're not exactly familiar with it. We assume the T stands for testicles. Oh, God. We quickly see that B'Etor is the Captain Jack of Star Trek, because she will attempt to seduce anyone given half the chance. They try to talk him into supporting their side, but he remains non-committal. It's pretty impossible for him. Pick them, and they'll almost certainly break off ties with the Federation and ally with the Romulans. Pick Gowron, and Picard will be accused of serving Federation interests, which will be used to justify a civil war. And Picard can't go with a third-party candidate, or else everyone will tell him he threw his vote away. There's just no winning here. So in front of the council, he makes his reasoning plain. Whatever tradition says, it makes no sense for a kid who has fought no battles, done no great deeds, and likely hasn't had his testicles dropped yet to be put in charge. But the Duras have a compelling case. Having introduced cleavage, they now promise regular allotments of side boob and nip slips for the glory of the Empire.
Does the Federation dictate Klingon destiny? Or do we? Follow me, and I will...
Our first stop, keyless cards and collectibles for a pack of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today is a good day to tech! Worf figures now is the moment to make his move, so he makes his offer to Gowron.
No, that will not be enough. The Duras family controls most of the fleet. We must have Federation.
Oh, sure. Give me a moment while I pull that out of my ass.
Do Do you tremble and quake with fear at the approach of combat? Hoping to talk your way out of a fight like...
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
a human? Or do you hear the cry of the warrior? Calling you to battle, calling you to glory like a Klingon.
I don't want to die! Duras forces are looking to end this war before it begins with a sneak attack, and Picard won't get involved even though Worf is on board. It would drag the Federation into the war. Worf already is in the middle of this shit, so he offers a suggestion that only a man made famous for getting his ass kicked would come up with. Let them think our ass is indeed kicked, so that they'll try to board, and when their shields are down, I'll target them manually, and boom! This works on one, but not the other. But luckily, Kurn arrives to save the day, and that's enough to convince Gowron to restore their family honor just as soon as the succession is completed, by the donning of the lead cape, so that the restoration can be completed by grabbing a knife by the wrong end. After all that's done, Gowron formally requests Federation help, and Picard formally says, "Geez, I'd like to really, but I got this thing, put it off twice already, can't do it again without looking like a dick, but gosh, next time you have a less Civil War-y kind of problem, you gotta move maybe, or need a wingman, I am there for you." Worf takes Gowron's side, pointing to the Romulan threat this poses if the Duras family wins, but Picard says no, and by the way, your vacation's over. Worf asks if maybe he could have an extension to help Gowron move? Picard refuses. By Gowron's act, Worf has attained the horizontal honor, the recognition by his peers that he is indeed a man of honor. This is now at odds with his internal honor, because the Klingon code would demand that he join his leader in battle, or at the very least find a way to directly aid the cause. But Picard had made clear that as a Starfleet officer, he was required not to do so. There is, therefore, only one course of action for Worf to take to satisfy both forms of honor. He must resign from Starfleet. To not would be to either dishonor himself before the Klingons, or aid the Klingons in secret like a Romulan would. So it may seem that he resigns a little too quickly, but that's only because for Worf, there simply is no way out of this dilemma other than that. Picard stops by to say some nice things about how Worf took the best qualities of humanity and made them part of himself. And then they arrive at the turbo lift looking like he's Worf's hostage, so don't know what happened there. The hallway's lined with people to see him off, but this is not the end of the episode. Back at Duras HQ, they learn of the rejection, and while Dookie pats himself on the back, the Romulan in the shadows is finally revealed, looking like Tasha Yar, and cliffhanger! Sela was conceived by Denise Crosby after yesterday's Enterprise, where she had a blast coming back to the not-suck era of TNG, and was thinking of a way to be part of that again. At the time, this was quite exciting, but gradually Sela got on the bad side of many members of the audience. In retrospect, it's easy to see where they dropped the ball and why. They built up the suspense, first by introducing a mysterious new Romulan adversary, then the reveal that the Romulan looked like Tasha 2 episodes later, and then the summer break, to leave fans speculating and excited. That was handled very well. The problem, though, was the payoff flopped in 2 ways. First, this escalation of tension required this new adversary to be more than someone who could just as easily have been Tomalak. Second, Sela was a huge question mark, a mystery, but the mystery was solved way too quickly. The answer was just dropped on the table and promptly forgotten as an irrelevancy to the events. Picard even stated as much, and so it wound up eating up valuable airtime in an episode that had so much to cover already. The only question it left was why, because her being the daughter of Tasha was not a subplot of this episode. It was at best a brief detour, so it didn't help the story. And long term it was irrelevant because she appeared in only one other story. In my opinion, the mystery needed to be drawn out much longer. Now, I know the fandom would have felt ripped off if there were no answers after the cliffhanger, but I think clues would have been ultimately more satisfying. For instance, the episode will already show the puzzlement over a Romulan that looks like Tasha Yar, but a Romulan isn't going to volunteer information to the Federation unless it served their ends, and this clearly didn't. She should have waved aside their comments and gotten on with the business at hand, leaving the Enterprise crew to check into who this is. Information on Romulans would be limited, of course, but they could put together a connection. Sela is likely coordinating with the Duras family because her father had previously been the contact, arranging with Duras' father the assault on Kittimer. Her father was chosen for that mission, it would be mentioned as an aside, because of his victory over the Federation flagship USS Enterprise 2 years before during a separate attack on the Klingons. This would provide little help to the Enterprise crew, but would give the audience a hint with the connection between Sela and the ship that Tasha Yar had flown into that very battle. This tying the events together would also provide a complex problem for Worf, as the loyal daughter of the man who murdered his parents has the faiths of someone that he respected as a warrior. In addition, I would have Sela believe Tasha to be just another human on the Enterprise C, rather than knowing that she was a time traveler, so that the truth would be as much of a surprise to her as it is to them. However, I can see a big reason not to do that, which is that to do this right would need to draw the mystery out over several episodes of Season 5, which had only 2 other Romulan stories in it, Unification and The Next Phase. Committing to this would mean at least 1 more Romulan story in there, probably 2 because The Next Phase really isn't much of a Romulan story, and it would be gambling on the audience being engaged by a new villain, when they might not be. It would be investing a lot of planning and changing all to create something the audience might wind up hating. As usual, when Redemption was created, there was no plan in place on how to resolve it. That was cooked up later on. And Sela is a sign of this approach. We had a great idea for a setup, but no plan in place on what to do after that. Sela could have become one of the most intriguing villains for TNG, but by just dumping the answer and letting it dangle there all pink and naked, they stripped out the most important element of the character. We pick up part 2 with Kern's personal ship getting its ass whooped. Things seem to have gone wrong for Worf since he's been reassigned some time ago from Gowron's personal ship to Kern's. Probably gave Gowron prune juice and he spent an entire battle in the bathroom. They're outnumbered, but thanks to a clever plan involving hitting the other ships with a sun, they escape. Surprisingly, this is not Worf's plan, it's his brother's. It would have been easy to again make Worf the hero in this spot, like in Part 1, but by reversing it, we see that Kern is a captain to be respected if he won a situation that Worf had deemed lost. Of course, that's basically a new twist on the old have someone beat Worf to prove they're a badass technique. Meanwhile, Picard is discussing the war with Fleet Admiral Shanti and what looks like an elderly Anderson Cooper. Duras has been winning the engagements, but that's likely due to Romulan support, and if so, the Federation should intervene to stop that support. They have a plan to set up a bunch of ships to detect any cloaked vessels that try to cross into Klingon territory, exposing the connection to the Duras family, and because the Romulans are so despised, their support would rapidly evaporate. An interesting plan. How many ships would you need? Well, you know, space is very, very big. We would need several trillion ships. You can have 23. You drive a hard bargain, but we'll go along with that. This is only a year after Best of Both Worlds, so it's no surprise that the fleet is still recovering. But it is inconvenient for Picard since a lot of the ships he's using will have no or small crews. He puts Riker in command of one of them, and...
You have commented on the lack of senior officers available for this mission. I believe my 26 years of Starfleet service qualifies me for such a post. However, if you do not feel the time has arrived for an android to command a starship, perhaps I should address myself to improve...
It's like Data is programmed to be a mom in Queens. Of course I'm not a captain. What do I know after decades of service? You know best. After Picard gives Data a ship, if only to end the guilt trip, we find the Klingons taking a break from fighting each other in the Civil War by heading to a bar where they can fight each other for no reason at all. Worf's a bit aghast that they're carousing with their enemies, especially when there's work to be done, but a few words in Worf starts to see Kern's point of view, seeing this all through Klingon eyes instead of his Starfleet training, and he seems to hesitantly want to embrace that. Back on the Sutherland, Data's new ship, Commander Hobson is less than thrilled that Data is the new captain, perhaps because he already has the role of a motionless officer tied up here and doesn't want Data encroaching on that.
Frankly, sir, I don't believe in your ability to command this ship. You're a fellow officer, and I respect that, but no one would suggest that a Klingon would be a good ship's counselor or that a Borellian could be an engineer. They're just not suited for those positions.
The Borellians are never seen or mentioned again, so I like to imagine based on this that they all look like Jar Jar Binks. He doesn't think that androids should be captains, which, while seeming like it butts up against Gene's humans are perfect rule, since that is rather bigoted, I'm guessing with the history of Data's sapience being in question by Starfleet that, even establishing he has rights, that doesn't mean everyone will jump and accept his orders. Also, Gene was nearing the end of his life. Former President Ronald Reagan visited the set during Part 1 of Redemption and picked up Gene's cane for him when he dropped it. Although given Gene's politics, he might have dropped it on purpose, hoping to kick Reagan in the butt when he bent over. Meanwhile, word of the Federation fleet gets to the Klingons, where Doogie Forehead starts jumping around and peeing on the furniture until someone finally gives him his favorite squeaky toy. Lursa dismisses it as too small to be more than a bluff, but Sela suspects that more is going on here and begins her plan. Meanwhile, Gowron is getting pissed off over the way the rebels are constantly recovering from every victory he has over them, few though they are. When someone calls out Gowron saying it's all his fault, well, as I said, the code requires that you answer all challenges to your honor or risk having it taken away from you. So Gowron pulls a knife to take him on while Worf tries to intervene, believing this is pointless when they have more important shit to get up to. Clearly interference. I'm surprised there wasn't a flag on that stab. Well, that's because it'd be pointless, Jim. Let's look at some scores from the high school stabbing league. Meanwhile, there's a problem with the Sutherland when they start deploying their anti-bad guy net, and Hobson starts taking action and issuing orders, shutting down weapons to cease the radiation flooding and ordering them to start repairing the coupling. When Data protests, Hobson puts everything back.
What should we do, sir? You will take the phaser and torpedo units offline and begin repairs of the starboard power coupling.
Brilliant! We never would have thought of that! But seriously, it was totally out of line for him to take that action, even if it was the correct action. Besides the fact that it was undermining Data's authority, disarming the ship is the kind of decision the captain should probably make when they're right next to an ugly civil war and watching for ships from their own mortal enemies. I mean, you never know what could happen. Like your former lover showing up in a funny wig threatening you. How can you plan for that? I mean, Facebook helps, but anyway. When called Tasha, she corrects them and says that Tasha was her mother. And now that I'm sure you're not trying to figure out the insane thing that I have just said, I'll issue my demands and cut the channel. Picard meets with Troy, who says that the woman is telling the truth, or at least she believes that she is. And Dr. Crusher, who is inexplicably not captaining a ship, says that Tasha was never pregnant. The only explanation is deceit. Except it's a silly one, since at most it will give them something weird to think about, but we'll have plenty of time to think about because they're on a blockade mission. You've got oodles of time on your hands then. Incidentally, the thing about Crusher made me realize something. Aside of the fleet admiral, who basically was just a rubber stamp, men are in charge of the good guys' side. Women, Lursa, B'Etor, Sela, are in charge of the bad guys' side. That's an interesting approach to diversity. Meanwhile, Worf's pissed off over what Gowron did.
A Klingon does not postpone a matter of honor.
A Klingon should place the good of the Empire above his own pride.
This is where Worf's internal honor and Klingon external honor are at odds with each other. External honor codes worked by creating an odd balance of selflessness and self-interest. Each person strove for honor because it benefited himself, yet a group all possessing this code, all adhering to the standards of honor, gave the entire group that standing. If anyone within lacked honor, they compromised the standing of that group. How can they be honorable if they allow someone who behaves so dishonorably to be one of them? And this standing was far more than ego was. It was about survival. If your clan was seen as being weak, then another clan might decide that they'll come and take what you have. Your lack of honor has now put everyone at risk. Thus, if you are challenged, not responding to it not only makes you look weak, it makes the entire group look weak. And remember, the reason Kern wanted to kill Gowron was because he perceived him as a weak man. Within this kind of culture, responding to a challenge to your honor is not only permitted, it's demanded. This is why, spoilers for DS9's The House of Quark, when Quark was challenged to a duel with Batleths and he instead threw it down and invited death, Gowron and the others responded the way that they did. Quark's fearlessness in the face of certain death showed that he might not be strong in arms, but he was not weak in will. That he went up to the jaws of death and invited them to close around him. He wasn't one of them, but in this way he behaved in a manner worthy of being a Klingon. Worf's internal honor conflicts with that. He puts the group first, as honor should require, and thus sees pride as something that should be ignored when necessary. But as he had said in Part 1, you can't regain honor by acting dishonorably. In the same way, a Klingon would argue that one can't fight for honor if one has been dishonored by another. Elsewhere, we have a diversion into the Sela issue. Guinan has issued her "I sense a disturbance in the Force" thing to once again baffle Picard and tell him that Tasha was on the ship and that he sent her there. And in a meeting with Sela, she confirms that, and explains that Tasha and a few others survived and were taken prisoner, and she agreed to be consort of the Romulan in charge in order to spare all of their lives. But eventually, when she tried to get away, Sela gave them both away, and Tasha was executed. So, there we have it. Tasha was originally killed by a slab of diarrhea, but we decided to give her a more dignified exit by turning her into a sex slave until she was killed by a rapist. Problem solved. Speaking of unwanted advances, Worf was beaten up and captured, and awakens to find B'Etor pawing over him, while apparently unable to decide which part of him to start licking first. Really, could it be more obvious, by the way? Her name is the second half of a word for self-gratification. They suggest that he marry her. It would provide a power shift by bringing Kurn and his forces over to the Duras side, and in return, he'd get to help be the puppet master for Doogie and whatever crazy stuff that B'Etor likes to get up to in private. I mean, after what she does in front of others, Lord knows what she does when no one else is looking. Worf naturally refuses. He'd chop off honor and courage before he helped the Romulans, so he's dragged off to be interrogated. The Romulans have given Picard a deadline before they will engage them in battle, under the pretense of driving off a clearly preemptive invasion force that's on their border. Picard doesn't want that, so he suggests to Gowron that he launch a full-scale attack, forcing the Romulans to try to run the blockade to resupply the Duras forces. He'll catch them in the act, pull off Sela's mask to reveal she's actually Old Man McGuffey, who'd have gotten away with it too if it wasn't those meddling kids, and everyone would be happy. But Sela is the daughter of an Enterprise crew member, remember. Technobabble solutions are in the blood. So she's been having them work at trying to find a way to circumvent this net, besides flying around it. And who would want to do that, anyway? When Picard tries to trick them by redeploying the fleet with a deliberate gap in there to try to lure the Romulans in, Sela sees right through it and instead sticks to their tech plan. They hit Data's ship with a tachyon burst, effectively like fighting Daredevil by blasting heavy metal music at him and then just tiptoeing past. Picard orders the fleet to fall back and reestablish the net, and Data starts to fall back with the rest of them, but let's face it, no one is out tech-teching him. He's cooked up a plan which he explains to a skeptical Hobson even as he's carrying it out, and ignores orders from the Enterprise to head on their way. Probably to ensure the Romulans don't pick up the transmission and get suspicious. He's already stopped at the Sutherland, which is unexpected. If they think he's setting up a trap, they might slip out of it first. The scene is somewhat controversial because Data seems like he's showing emotion, but as Spiner points out, Data is emulating the leadership that he has witnessed, how a certain way of speaking is more effective than his matter-of-fact tone. That's something he learned all the way back in Ensigns of Command. Naturally, this works. The Romulans are revealed and slink back, knowing that even if they deliver the supplies, the Duras allies will abandon them once proof of their involvement is shown, and Hobson eats a bit of crow. The Duras sisters are a bit pissed off, and B'Etor spits when she looks at Worf. Man, that's like finding something a dog refuses to eat. While Worf beats up his Romulan captor, Lursa and B'Etor abandon Doogie to his fate while they beam away, and Kurn himself takes him prisoner to be brought before Gowron. Picard's there to see it after he delivers his report to Gowron, after giving Data his attaboy, of course. Gowron is planning to give Worf the honor of killing the little squirt. But after all he has been through, Worf sees that there are aspects of the Klingon Empire that he no longer agrees with. If the kid was to be executed as a traitor, that'd be one thing. But this is clearly not that. This is about revenge, and as Worf notes, he has nothing that he needs to avenge himself on with this boy. It was his father that wronged Worf, and Worf already made him pay for that. So he spares the kid, and his remark again shows the difference between internal and external honor, as Kurn says that killing him is their way, but Worf insists that's not his way. One can define one's own sense of honor. Post-episode follow-up, annoying character goes to the kid, although I suppose he was probably meant to be. I still wanted to see someone whoop his ass just a little. Final score for Redemption in its entirety is 8 out of 10. While it was no best of both worlds, it did offer a fast-paced and exciting drama, so much so that it's only after the fact that we realize we see only 2 minor skirmishes in the entire war. While Part 1 was almost exclusively Worf's, Part 2 had him sidelined for a lot of it. But that's alright, because what we do get continues the journey from Part 1 and brings it to its conclusion. That's all it really needs to do. And with Worf asking to return to duty, well, surprisingly easy, I suppose, but really his resignation was more of a pretense. The fact that, as Picard said, a Federation officer couldn't go, so Worf would need to give that up for the duration. It's fine. Starfleet's a little fast and loose with those kinds of things. Seela's an oddity. At the time it fit, but in retrospect it was clearly out of place, as her introduction in this form only makes sense if it was intended to be the first of a series of encounters. Otherwise it's just a bizarre inclusion. It would be like if in the middle of the story Jack Crusher skipped ahead in time onto the Enterprise, had 2 scenes, and then just skipped back again. No one is saying it wasn't an idea with potential, but what the hell was it doing in this story? But despite that, and another in the tradition of starting a story without planning the second half of the cliffhanger, Redemption does a fine job of holding your interest throughout its run, including giving us a chance to see Klingons in action when there is no one but Klingons around. As far as handling these events in a vacuum, I'd say the episode held up very well. Only the Seela thing, and sorry if I keep on harping on it, but it's true. Only the Seela thing is difficult, and that's because it's a complicated alternate reality time travel plot. That's just not something you can easily cover with exposition. But other than that, you never seem lost. The backstory the episode gives is more than sufficient to keep you in the loop.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
So now Gawa no longer suits you. Perhaps you wish to challenge him for the leadership of the council. No! Then do not speak of this again!